Hello everyone! My name is Voltie. I am a committee member for 7 Point Highlander, and today I'm very excited that we're going to be bringing you the Aether Drift 7 Point Highlander points update. This is the change that's going to be the format for the next couple of months, and then there'll be a small change prior to Mana Clash. So we'll be looking at the metagame evolving, but this is obviously our changes after CanCon and after some of the end-of-year events. Above me here you can see Mouse, Ben Hewitt, who is one of the other committee members, and I'm very excited that he's managed to find some time in his busy schedule to help me out with today's presentation. So Mouse, take it away.
I think we're pleased to say that looking at the past few tournaments, we have seen a lot of the things we're looking for in this format. We've seen lots of different decks, lots of different archetypes, a lot of really unique and diverse choices within those decks. And so what we're really looking for here today is not a big, broad swath of changes, but rather a few targeted and what we think will be quite meaningful changes, but always with the view, of course, to, in the long term, if things start to settle down and homogenize, maybe acting in the future. But for now, you can just expect, a targeted points announcement from us. We want to move on to the first change. Probably to the surprise of no one, we are moving Nadu Winged Wisdom to 2. I will say on this card that I don't think this card has any one particularly offending characteristic. It just kind of is slightly offensive on all of the characteristics. So what I mean by that is that it hasn't had any major standout performances. It's not like Nadu has been making multiple top 8s or winning any major tournaments. However, when we do look at the way which Nadu decks have performed compared to non-Nadu decks, it has been trending upwards, and at CanCon it has definitely made quite a splash. Secondly, it is starting to homogenize deck construction a bit. Not that every deck is running Nadu, but nearly every combo deck, or at least most of them, are starting to run Nadu as nearly a default plan B. The individual play patterns, whilst not universally panned, have drawn a lot more criticism from players than probably most other average cards, and we do take that sort of thing into consideration. And lastly, on tournament logistics, whilst there are a lot of players who can very efficiently keep track of game states and run through Nadu lines quickly, you only really need one or two players in an event to drag the whole thing down. We're not saying this card is like Sensei's Divining Top level of literally every end step takes an extra minute, but it's about as close to that kind of thing as you can get out of a card. And when you put all of these cards together, all of these factors together, it ends up creating a reasonable justification to put Nadu to 2. We think people will still play it because it is a powerful card, but maybe there'll be less of it.
Yeah, I mean, for my personal take on Nadu, I think some people will be surprised that it's going to 2 and not 3. That's not a change that I think we ever considered, just to let everyone know. Keeping it at 1 was very unlikely. I think we were all pretty set on Nadu. So in terms of this change, I don't think people should be surprised. If you are, there's probably a little bit of the metagame that you've missed out on, would be my guess. But that leads into the next change, which is pretty much exactly the same thing. Demonic Counsel is going to 1. This card is incredibly close to Demonic Tutor. Realistically, the decks that are able to turn it on are the combo decks, which also want the DT, so it has a natural self-fulfilling prophecy. The ability to hate on the graveyard in order to turn off Delirium is difficult to do in a meaningful enough way, because a lot of the decks that are playing Counsel were able to put quite a lot of cards into their graveyard and turn it back on. It's one of those things where we wanted to give it a bit of space. We wanted to see if Demonic Counsel could be handled, supposedly, but over time, its play rate has gone up, its win rate has gone up, it's showing up everywhere that you would expect a Demonic Tutor to show up. And over the entire Watchlist period, it did very well. And on top of everything, the committee approaches tutors pretty much the same as it always has. We let this one breathe for a little bit, but, it's Demonic Tutor. It wasn't going to stay at 0. And I don't think anyone should be particularly surprised about this one either. Doesn't look like there's any questions in chat, so if you want to talk about this, Mouse.
Yeah, let's. This card, I think you've covered it. You've covered it exactly. It's about as close to the Demonic Tutor as you can get. Wanted to see if if it was easy to turn on. Answer: yes, it is. So putting it to 1. I actually can't see the chat, so if there's any questions, feel free to read them out. And but otherwise, I'm happy to just go to the next card. The next card we've got is Abhorrent Oculus to 1, and kind of on the same vein as Demonic Counsel, looks a lot like a pointed card in Demonic Tutor. Abhorrent Oculus looks a lot like a pointed card in Murktide Regent. Obviously, they're not exactly the same, but they are large blue evasive creatures which are supposedly gated behind a graveyard reliant mana cost, but that mana cost is not that hard, or that additional cost rather, is not that hard to overcome. Obviously, they are slightly different. Murktide Regent is slightly taller, Abhorrent Oculus is slightly wider. However, we're really nibbling around the edges here, and there are going to be some games where Oculus is better and some games where Murktide's better. Given that these cards are just so close, they probably should be the same point. Obviously as well, Oculus has found a place in many quite competitive decks. It provides quite a good one-card game plan as a plan B for Reanimator. It is also one of Grixis's premier threats, and Grixis continues to be a premier deck. So it does, the kind of damage, I guess you would say, this card has on the quality of decks are hitting decks which are very popular and very competitive right now. So we're happy with this card from both a power perspective, but also from its effect on the metagame to put it at 1. That pretty much sums it up for me on that one.
Yeah, not much to say. I mean, from the very first weekend that Duskmourn was legal, Eyeball was as many places as it could be. In fact, I think its performance increased over time as its card availability increased over time, oddly enough. I remember the first weekend that it was legal, there were people looking for a copy, they were willing to spend $60, $70 for it, and they couldn't find it. This card is really good, and on the one hand, it isn't Murktide Regent. On the other hand, no card has been as close to Murktide Regent as we've had ever. You know, we've got like Tombstalker, and that card's terrible. But now we have, 2 blue flying threats that use the graveyard that encourage you to trade resources and play a longer game. And it didn't make sense for both of them to be at 0. It doesn't make sense for one of them to be at 1 and one of them to be at 0. So we're making this change. There will be people paying the point for Oculus because it's, incredibly good. We might see a divergence away from Lutri for some of the Grixis players, and they'll play Murktide and Oculus, which will be interesting in terms of deck building. But the card itself is pretty simple. Now, what I think will be most surprising to some of you is that that's it.
Up on 2 things though. 1, don't be hating on my Tombstalker. Tombstalker remains a sleeper awesome card. But just in case anyone had seen a data video I did a while back, there actually was a brief dip in Oculus dominance, but that was in the RC immediately before Red-White got a slew of pointings. And since those Red-White pointings, Oculus's performance has really shot up. So it was just kind of one of those cards which maybe should have been pointed alongside them, even though at the time it appeared not to be performing as well. But it's definitely performing very well now.
Unfortunately, my drum roll moment got cut off there. But that is it for the points changes. We thought about having a big points change this time around and then a smaller one in the lead up to Mana Clash. However, I think most of us on the committee agreed that this metagame is fine. It needed a little bit of adjustment. We wanted to hit the cards that I think everyone knew that we needed to hit. But seeing the metagame develop from now, with Counsel going to 1 especially, and being less of a free roll, Nadu going to be taken out of walks, which should also be interesting, and a lot of the blue-black X decks are going to have to make meaningful choices in their threat mana base. Should be interesting. There are other points changes that we discussed, but I think that this particular points update is going to be meaningful enough for us to see some changes going forward, and then we can readjust as needed prior to Mana Clash, which is the next big weekend. Not next big individual event, but the next big Highlander weekend. So getting into the watch list changes, actually I'm going to check chat.
Yeah, do we have any questions so far?
It's actually just comments. People, people in general are kind of chill with what's happened. Cool. Okay. Well, in that case, let's go for the watch list. And to start things off, we're removing crop rotation. This card is something that some people think that it can be at 0. Some people think it needs to stay at 1. And there are a lot of people in the middle camp. At the moment, with how some of the previous changes have occurred, we wanted to keep it safe, and there is a decent chance that crop rotation to 0 is unsafe. So while Academy has gone up a point, that card is still very good, continues to perform very well, and the combination of Strip Mine and Fast Bond is currently 1 point, which was originally an experiment, putting Strip down to 1, but we've kept it. And because of that, adding an extra card to that 3-card combo, essentially, and still leaving the points amount intact, a little bit dangerous. Lastly, crop rotation suffers from the same thing as like Birthing Pod and Green Sun Zenith and a bunch of other old tutory type cards. As WotC experiments and prints new lands that have a lot of text, especially in supplemental sets like MH3, the land quality is only going to go up. There's no possible way for there not to be new lands that make it into Highlander over time. And if we bring it down to 0 and they print a bunch of really silly cards, we're just going to have to put it back up to 1. Going forward, we'll keep an eye on Academy, we'll keep an eye on Strip Fast Bond. I imagine if Fast Bond goes back to 1, or if Strip goes to 2, maybe Crop can be revisited. But for now, we took the safe approach, and I think that's probably for the best. A question from Kartog. Was there much consideration for the recent success of bots, or does the committee think that's a flash in the pan with Counsel and Nadu running around?
What was the question about, like, is bots doing too well?
Yeah, was there much consideration for the recent success of bots?
Yeah, so look, I would say this. The first thing is that bots as a deck, whilst it's doing quite well, is not a massive share of the metagame, and it's not like it's enjoying an overabundance of top 8 appearances or anything like that. You know, it's not like we've seen a top 8 with more than one bots deck in it. The bots decks which are succeeding are also quite different to one another. So it has that kind of like inter-deck diversity which we like to see. But you know, kind of at the beginning of the stream, I mentioned that we were really faced with a choice if we wanted to do like a big change. Because of the relative way which we like how the format is balanced at the moment, it would mean like a lot of points to a lot of different decks, and certainly bots would be on the list if we were doing that. But that sort of points update would look like a point on Grixis and a point on bots and a point on like probably like, you know, another 3 or 4 decks, just to preserve that balance. So we are aware that bots is like a competitive deck, but we like decks to be competitive, and we like archetypes to be competitive. That's why, you know, we gave that's why we you know, looked at Tolarian Academy after we did like the big pointing to a lot of bots competitors and thought, well, we can give bots one and keep it competitive, and it is, and it was. So even though bots received a points last update, it's still quite competitive, and we like that. But we don't think bots is like too competitive, or that it's crowding out other decks, or that it's too successful. It's just yet another awesome deck that you can play in 7 point, which you don't necessarily get to play in other formats, and we'd like to keep it that way.
We have a question from Dracos, which I think you'll want to answer, but I'll answer just so that we keep alternating. Any considerations to helping out classic draw-go control? Is there a change that could be made at this point, or is the game just too fast and proactive? We obviously care about the health of the format, and part of the committee's statement and mission is to allow everything to exist, and we understand that classic draw-go control doesn't really exist in the way that it used to. The threat density has gone way up. You know, you don't get 1 to 2 win-con decks anymore. Part of that is the game is very fast, it's very proactive, it's very aggressive. Part of that is the lack of premium control tools being printed by Wizards. We're never going to see another Mana Drain. We're never going to see another Force of Will. It's something that if we have the ability to give control a card at a depointing, for example, that doesn't impact the metagame as a whole, that's something we're thinking about. And there is a card that Mouse brought up in the last meeting that he wants to have a look at taking a point off. Personally, I'm for that change, but it's something we're going to have to revisit next time around. And, you know, there's a lot of sides to it. Some people don't view Drogo control as a reasonable or healthy part of the metagame, because obviously they don't like getting their spells counted, and people like putting stuff into play and having really intense board states with a lot of permanence. But then there are the counterspell fans who obviously want to be able to do what they want to do. So it's, you know, it's a balancing act as well. If Drogo control becomes the best thing to do, we're going to see a lot more draws in tournaments, and that's just a, you know, tertiary supplementary problem that we would have to deal with. I would love to hear Mouse's thoughts though, as a control fanatic.
I have a few. So for context, like the controller's the main deck which I play. I have dabbled in other archetypes and stuff, but most tournaments I bring a control deck. I don't think that Drogo control is uncompetitive. I might be biased just because I've had quite good positive records, like including a second place finish at the RC side event with Drogo control. Although I acknowledge, like, I make a lot of like unconventional deck building decisions. So, mate, you know, who knows? Maybe I've just hit a hot streak twice. So, like, for the first thing I'd say is control players. The deck is actually better than it looks in the stats, in my opinion, at least. Having said that, I do want control to be a bigger part of the metagame. I think it is I think the lack of wrath effects in this format, for example, and people playing them leads to some weird deck building considerations around, like, you know, what creatures are good and things like that. So I do wish that there was more control around. The biggest problem is that because most control decks rely on blue cards, and the premier, like, bad guy in the format is a blue cards mid-range deck, it is very hard to give control tools without inadvertently buffing the best deck in the format. And that, you know, an increased presence of control is not going to be worth that collateral. Having said that, I am thinking about some cards in the background which I think could work. It's just going to be a matter of time and not rushing to judgment on any of these depointings, at risk of, you know, making Grixis better or something. So for control players out there, I hear you. I am thinking about ways to help, but it's just not right now, because there's like, you know, I wouldn't want to just give Grixis another tool without really thinking about its implementation properly first. So let me test and things, and then we'll get back to that.
We're being asked for a spoiler on what the card is that we were thinking about depointing.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
There are actually about 5 cards, to be fair. There's only like one where I got a bit of okay, interesting. The other 5 were like, no, but like, I'll fight the good fight. Don't worry.
I think that's all the questions. Rest of comments. I think we can move to the next watch list change. This one's you.
Yeah, okay, so look, fourth Eorlingas, so for context here, prior to CanCon, there was a real, like, over-representation of specifically red-white decks, and there were about, like, kind of, you know, 4 cards we bandied about as being probably the pinnacle of what was making that deck particularly overtuned, and that was, those cards were Flage, White Plume Adventurer, Fourth, and the last one's currently escaping.
Fable,
the Mirror Breaker, that's right, yeah, so... Fourth was the one that missed the chopping block at that time. But since then, it's not that Fourth as a card has gotten any less powerful, but like the decks that Fourth is good in have gotten less powerful due to those other pointings. And so it's just not really necessary to move on Fourth at this time. There is like a world where, you know, sometime in the future, what we hope is that the points changes we've made this time, which you'll notice that none of which hit red-white, kind of, you know, by relative power, bring red-white a little bit back more competitive, because it's not doing as well as we would like it to do. But, you know, there's a world where in the future, if red-white becomes really good again, for example, that maybe Fourth gets a point, or maybe there might be a point swap if one of those cards in red-white which are pointed really craters in play and it, you know, like becomes soft banned or something like that. But for now, we definitely don't need to hit red-right again, and so Fourth thus doesn't need a point.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I've got a question. Do you think because Nadu +1, Walks Dex goes back to 4th and becomes overplayed good again? It's possible, but I think it's unlikely. There are a lot of 1-point cards that Walks can choose from. But that wasn't a consideration with removing 4th from the watch list. It was definitely, we pointed 3 of the 4 potential Boros cards. We put it on the watch list in case we needed to make the 4th change, because that was obviously a very contentious point across the committee. But Boros has fallen off a fair amount, or at the very least base Boros. And so 4th is being removed. And yeah, as Mal said, if one of the other pointings we made gets depointed, for example, or re-watch listed to go down, we might have to revisit this. So, for example, I pitched 4th over Flage, and 4th going to 2 and Flage staying at 0. But these things are, lots of small cogs in a bigger change that we were looking for.
Another thing just to add on that as well is that, I'm not necessarily worried about, Nadu going up, making Walks better because they now run 4th. I mean, Walks, whilst it's a good deck and a part of the metagame, and that is a good thing, has never really overperformed as much as people might think that it has. I've been, looking at a lot of these tournaments and the data and the number of people playing them. And Walks has notably missed a lot of top 8s. Unless we're all suggesting that every Walks player has been chronically misbuilding their deck, except for, I suppose, Jordan, by not playing 4th, and now that they're all going to have to play 4th and their decks will get better. I just don't think that's the case. I think that there's a lot of really good deck building going behind Walks. It's split into ones which splash red and ones which have a more heavy black focus. Maybe those black decks will play Demonic Counsel, the Demonic
Counsel.
What's it called now? Demonic Consult now. Maybe they'll play the One Ring. There's a lot of options for Walks decks, and the variety within that archetype is a really good thing. So I'm not worried about us accidentally, bullying Walks players into playing a better deck. I think they know what the best version of Walks is, and if 4th is it, well then great. It's just another way this card can be played, but it wouldn't make 4th too good right at this moment.
Okay, I think we can move on.
Yep. Next.
We have removed Lutri from the watch list. So when we were thinking about pointing Grix's last update, the question of Lutri or Gush or both was basically where we were falling. There are a bunch of different Grixis threats that we could have pointed, but I really wanted to attack the card advantage aspect of the deck. And that led to us, pointing Gush because it was very, very prevalent in Grixis and very, very noticeably absent from the rest of the metagame. And we wanted to keep an eye on Lutri because, it is 3 points, but it is a companion, and that is by far the most broken mechanic we've ever had. So it's something that we've had to, keep an eye on in that sense. In saying that, since the change to Gush, we have seen a lot of question marks from the Grixis side of the community. Whether or not you play Lutri, whether or not you don't, whether or not you play Lutri with Gush, because that's 5 points. If you count Force, that's 6 points, and you really run out of space. And so the Grixis decks have diverged really heavily. We're seeing a lot of 7 1-point cards. We're seeing a lot of Lutri, Gush, Force, 1 random point, which was the most recent CanCon winning deck, for example. And I think leaving Lutri at 3 for now, while that question is still being investigated by the community, is perfectly fine. It appears in Blue Moon, it appears in control decks, where Gush didn't, and that is also part of why Lutri stayed at 3. But yeah, moving forward, we'll keep an eye on it, obviously, but we're not going to keep a formal eye on it, just because where Lutri is sitting now at the moment with 3 is pretty healthy. It appears, it doesn't over-appear, it hasn't disappeared. That's kind of what you want. I think realistically, Lutri going to 4 is not going to happen for quite a while, I would suspect.
Yeah, I would just add that, but basically when we put Lutri to 3, there was a real question mark of, will all of the Grixis state players just continue to automatically play Lutri in the same fashion they were when Lutri was at 2, right? Because you could imagine, there was a different world where every Grixis deck continued to just pay for Lutri at 3, and we'd think, God, if they're going to pay for it at 3, maybe they pay for it at 4. But But what actually happened is that nearly in like in a 50-50 split in most tournaments, the Lutri non-Lutri thing is actually a real, like, it's a difference maker. And it's not like one version is strictly better than the other or either. Like in the CanCon top 8, one was a Lutri deck and one was not. And that's mission accomplished. There is now diversity with it, that like playing Lutri or not playing Lutri is now a real choice for those decks. And it is a key role player in other decks which we don't want to do any splash damage to. So the pointing did the job, and so we don't need to overdo it. We watch listed it just to like give ourselves the forward justification of, if everyone continues to just play Lutri automatically, then we might need to act again. But that didn't happen, so off the watch list it goes.
The next one is all you.
All right, so this is not like strictly and exclusively a conversation about Force of Will. It is, and there's another card which Voltie will be talking about in just a moment. This is more us experimenting with the idea of, it's not necessarily just Grixis, but this kind of blue tempo, blue mid-range package has probably been the deck, I'd say, historically in Highlander, which has consistently received the most points, but also seems to be the most consistently a tier 1 deck, right? Right now it's Grixis. It used to be like Kespile or Rug, or once upon a time, like for those old enough to remember, like there was a Kurgan control, right? And so there has always been a big baddie blue mid-range pile. And we're not saying that this type of deck should be uncompetitive. We do want it to be competitive, but it does seem to be, like, numerically a deck which lots and lots and lots of players pick up, and it also seems to be succeeding a little bit, and that does run counter to the goal of dehomogenizing the format and creating diversity. And so we're trying to think, the current strategy has been pointing the threats within these decks, and that's why you would have seen a lot of cards like Psychic Frog, and like the Oculus and the Murktide before, like there are many cards like this accruing points. However, what we're noticing is that a lot of these threats are very, very interchangeable. And we're not saying that we're done pointing threats, like we have pointed Oculus. There are some other threats which we kind of softly have our eye on at the moment. But we are toying with the idea of attacking it from another angle, similarly to how we pointed Lutri and Gush, because that seemed to have quite a pronounced impact. So one of those angles is the free counter magic, and Force of Will at one point is probably the consistently most played 1 point card, like as an average across all tournaments, out of any of them. And it is probable that out of the 40 to 50 people who always rock up with Force of Will, maybe 20 or more of them would pay 2 points for it. And if that's the case, maybe it does deserve 2 points. Because what this card does, particularly for proactive blue decks, is it allows them to tap out for a haymaker threat in a somewhat risk-free manner. And that is a very powerful effect, and something which we think maybe they would be willing to pay an extra point for. We are, however, the reason we're not just jumping to putting this at 2 is that we are worried about some collateral impacts on the format and would like to start a community discussion about it. So, for example, does making Force of Will a less prevalent feature of the format make combo too good? Or on the other hand, maybe combo now can't afford to pay Force of Will and protect its own combo and it evens out. Or maybe since the pointing of other things like Mental Misstep and Subtlety and Force of Negation means that this has already done enough of a job in, stifling combo from running away for things. That's a part of the discussion. Another part of the discussion is blue-based control is not doing super well in the format at the moment, and will this punish them in a way which we don't want? However, on the other hand, maybe tap out, also not tap out control, maybe reactive control actually is the beneficiary of less proactive decks playing Force of Will, because it means that they can't then protect their threat with a Force of Will. And so maybe control has the points to spend on this sort of thing because it doesn't need to spend points on threats and inadvertently becomes the beneficiary of Force of Will going up to 2. These are the types of decisions which are, frankly, were too complicated for us to make all in one little short period of time between CanCon and now, but it is a discussion which we are having as a committee. It's a discussion that we would like to be transparent to you as a community about and to hear your thoughts as well. So if you've got thoughts on this change, would you pay for this thing at 2? Do you think this would allow combo to run away with the format? Those sorts of thoughts, please put them in Public's Points discussion. We will be reading them, and so that's part of the discussion we want to start. This, for the second part of the discussion, I'll hand it to Voltie.
Yeah, just one final note on Force of Will. If everyone can keep in mind this potential change, whenever you put Force of Will into your deck, if you can let us know if it's the 7th point or like the 1st or 2nd or 3rd point, that's usually a really good indicator of whether or not a card needs an extra point or whether or not it's fine where it is. So, for example, I personally am willing to spend the first point out of my deck on Deathrite Shaman, where a lot of other people are like, this is my 7th point, you know, it's between this and Snapcaster and OBM. Forcible is a very divisive card in that sense. There are decks and people that I'm going to play Forcible in this event, I'm going to make sure my blue card count is fine, let's do it. And then there are the usually combo side of the community where it's like, I have space for Forcible, that's kind of cool, but my first 5 or 6 points were already accounted for. And so if you can keep that in mind, that honestly is meaningful feedback. And I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on it when I play the card. The other Watchlist change, and this is the one that I pitched, is Expressive Iteration to 1 point. Basically, what Mouse said about pointing threats over and over again, that's where we came to this. If every single card that they print in MH sets and in, you know, supplementary sets and commander products are threats that win the game by themselves, if you point half of them, people will play the other half. If you point a third of them, they have access to 2/3. If you point 1 or 2 of them, then they have access to the whole suite. However, Expressive Iteration is a very uniquely powerful card along the veins of things like Brainstorm and Ponder. And I was very excited to see people talking about Brainstorm to 1 again and having that, you know, divide across the community of whether or not, you know, a cantrip that is this powerful is worth a point. AI is very similar to those cards sometimes, and sometimes it is the single best card in your deck across a variety of matchups. If every one of your threats is similarly powerful, AI finding 2 of them wins you the game. If you are playing land light to play more interaction, more discard spells, more threats, AI is the best card you can play on turn 3. And so, when you think about all the cards that Grixis can, you know, interchangeably play, and this is very targeted at Grixis, I want to make that clear, but if you think about all of the cards that they can interchange, you know, if you point Oculus, do they play a different flying threat? Do they play a different 3-drop threat? The deck remains the same. I'm very curious to see if people can find a replacement for AI, because I genuinely don't think you can. And whether or not you're willing to spend the point for a card that's this good, when you have Mystic Sanctuary in your deck, when you have discard spells, when you're trading really low on resources, is this a card that you want to spend a point on? It also helps a bunch of other side effect impacts. So for example, Blue Moon is traditionally 7 points, but there are a lot of 8-point Blue Moon players. They're going to be able to spend the point on AI, you know? The blue-red X control decks, where all of their threats are kind of whatever, they get to play AI to draw further into their deck for answers, to make their land drops, and they can spend that point. Grixis probably won't be able to, and this is going to reduce the impact of that deck. It's going to reduce their top deck ability in the mid-game. You know, how many times have you played against Grixis? You're both hellbent. They draw AI, and the game is immediately over. You know what I mean? Where if instead they drew a threat, and then you drew an answer, you'd be back at parity. So, yeah, the idea of Force of Will and AI going on the watch list is basically, how can we avoid having to point every single threat? What else can we do? And so having these discussions, having people really review their non-threat cards, you know, their discard spells, their cantrips, their draw spells, their answers, where and how do you make space during your deck building? So yeah, that's the AI pitch. That's the Force of Will pitch. I think we should get to some questions here.
Just one little thing before, and kind of similar to the Force of Will, like there are kind of like soft concerns about this as well. Like, for example, we want to know from you guys, would you pay a point for EI? Because this is the type of card where we wouldn't want a pointing to become a soft ban, and that's kind of similarly the concern with other cards like Brainstorm, which people have talked about. So, whereas EI is not as obviously replaceable, like Brainstorm, you could in theory swap it out for Portent or something like that. It's not as good, but it's still like a single blue card selection spell, EI is less replaceable. There isn't like an obvious, like swap, like a 2-mana card advantage card like that. But the question would just be, would you pay a point for this card? Because we wouldn't want to point it for it to be a soft ban. We want to point it because maybe it actually is worth the power and people have been, quote unquote, getting away with it. That's the kind of feedback we'd like to hear on that one.
Yeah, just a reminder, this card is banned in a lot of formats. Like, just saying, you think EI is just this quirky little friend. This card is banned in Legacy. It's that good, But yeah, that is it for the watch list. So in case you've missed it, we have removed Crop Rotation, Fourth Eorlingas, and Lutri, and we are looking at Force of Will and EI. Let's have a look at chat. Looks like Michael and Raj have been answering some questions, which is good.
Heroes in the chat, Michael and Raj. Let's hear it. Has Pat been in the chat answering questions as well?
No, I haven't seen Pat's name.
Paying committee dues.
Harry is asking a question. Would love to hear about what the path forward for Gamble is to be able to re-enter the format. Continues to remain shadow banned for Breach of Sin. I propose swapping that point to LED.
Yeah, it's possible. Well, it's not like this is a conversation we haven't had, but as we kind of said before, we kind of like the format where it is right now. Breach is good, but not dominant. It's able to win, but it's not a huge meta share. Now is probably not the time to mess with that particular thing. But if we were to make like a bigger move, then Gamble would be one of the things we'd consider. We're not unaware of this. That's just to say that.
Vox, was there any talk on the black mid-range package? There wasn't any talk about it on stream. However, there were plenty of discussions about it in the committee meeting. At the moment, our angle is, can we avoid pointing every threat one at a time? And that's how the watchlist change happens about. And we also wanted to see the impact of Counsel, Nadu, and Oculus, because Oculus is very, very closely aligned with black as a color. So, in essence, a soft hit to the black mid-range package. On the other hand, those cards also help out the non-blue decks quite significantly. I think Jund would be far less playable if things like Emperor of Bones or Barragoyf were pointed, because they just have less space and they really need to spend all their points on threats.
I just add to this black mid-range thing. So, yes, we definitely spoke about the black mid-range package, at length. The thing is that what we're trying to figure out right now, and this is part of the discussion we're starting with the watch list, is that it's not clear if the power of the black mid-range package actually comes from the cards as singular, or if it comes from their context in, for example, a Grixis deck. Because Barragoyf, for example, is a 3-mana, 0 ETBs, requires to attack and connect in order to accrue a game-winning amount of advantage. And whilst obviously when those things happen, it's really excellent. In theory, a control deck should be making mincemeat of this plan by just trading a Fatal Push into your 3-drop. Or even Brazen Borrow should be very good against Barragoyf. Or cards like Rest in Peace off the sideboard should completely invalidate the large collection of graveyard-related hate pieces. So one of the things we are, trying to think about is it necessarily Barragoyf being the problem, or is it the fact that it is supported by free counter magic, or that it is found every game at the right time with card selection? That's the thought process we're going through, and you can copy and paste that justification onto other black mid-range threats like Sheoldred or Emperor of Bones. Maybe Nethergoyf, because it's a 1-drop, might be escaping some of that justification a little bit. But, a 2-drop with an activated ability which you can remove in response should be kind of vulnerable. A 4-drop, which any deck can dismember, should be kind of vulnerable, with no ETB effect. We understand these cards are very, very good and they're very, very pushed, but we are just thinking very hard about maybe it is their context in the deck rather than the card itself which makes them too good before we just spray a point on everything. The discussion has been had, and that's kind of where it's at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, honestly, if the community can pick up some slack and play more Terminates, I think we'd be better off. Next question, was City of Traders discussed to +1? Yeah, it was in the sheet. At the moment, I think we're fine with where some of the big mana decks are. We are keeping an eye on them, but they have natural predators, obviously, so, it's very easy to have those adjustments. one of the concerns with putting a 0-point card to 1 when it's as expensive as City of Traders is harming the new player experience. Same thing with something like Mox Diamond or Tabernacle, just really expensive RL cards that appear in the format sometimes. But I think that's more of an afterthought. At the moment, Academy to 2 was the last change we made to the big mana decks. This time around, we're hitting some of the decks that, are also existing in the metagame. If it takes over, I think we'll all be kind of surprised. But hitting, Ancient Tomb or City of Traders or Mana Vault or Sol Ring, those are all potentially possible.
I just said, kind of at the beginning of the stream, how I'd said, if we have a choice because the balance is quite good of hitting a lot of decks or just a few cards in the a lot of decks version of this points announcement, which we decided was not the right decision. Maybe we try to point something in big mana, and City of Traders might have been a candidate, but we're also aware that cards like City of Traders are part of the red white and red black stompy decks, and those decks have recently already received quite a lot of points. And so we want, if we are thinking about pointing big mana in a broader pointing, maybe there's a better candidate than City of Traders to point, but it definitely was brought up in discussion.
Invictus asks, I would like to hear your thoughts on Tinker post-CanCon.
It's a good card. It is not overly prevalent in a lot of different decks. The most obvious deck we thought, which might be a problem, would be Bolas' Citadel, but that deck has just failed to produce really, really good results. If you look at its play, there's usually about, at a big event, there's between 1 and 4 players piloting it. Some of them do pretty well. Some of them do not very well. It just depends, really. And so that, to me, is just a normal deck in 7-point Highlander. Sometimes you do well with it, sometimes you don't. That's fine. For the bots players, a minority of bots players paid to play Tinker. Sometimes the Tinker ones do well. Sometimes the non-Tinker ones do well. That's fine as well. It's a powerful card, but it's not homogenizing decks. It's actually creating difference within decks, which is good, because prior to Tinker, nearly all the bots decks were just mud. Now there are a few Tinker decks. Before that, the Tinker Citadel Storm deck wasn't really a thing at all. Now there's a couple of people playing it who weren't before. So the depointing has created more players in the format and more difference between decks. It's fulfilling the mission statement. If it starts to do the opposite and homogenize decks, we'll have a look at it again.
There was a question about Entomb, but Raj has answered that. Is there a world where Renin 6 could go to 1? If so, what else would it take? Or what's in the way of it currently? I can take this. So, Renin 6 as a card is very, very powerful. Whether or not it's 2 points powerful is up for discussion. It was pointed at a time where the red-white package as a default to add to blue was quite scary and underpointed. At the moment, Strip Mine is at 1, and Renin 6 Strip Mine probably can't cost you 2 points, for example. Having the ability to answer so many of the X1s in the format was part of why it went to 2. Having the ability to hit every single land drop for the whole game in something like Walks was part of why it went to 2. What it would take for it to go to 1, firstly, Strip Mine would probably have to go back to 2, just because that level of a miserable play experience. Because, when you think about Fast 1 Strip Mine Crucible, it's 3 cards, costs a bunch of effort, and it blows up all your lands. When part of that combo is a Planeswalker that also draws you cards and also answers threats, then it becomes really scary, because Crucible as a card is unplayable. 3 mana do nothing, right? Whether or not Renin 6 can go to 1 really depends on the blue package around it and the red package around it. Less so the green package. Renin 6 isn't a Gruul card, for example. It's very clearly a Tamer card. But I don't think it's on our radar collectively. It's a thing that maybe at some point we can revisit, but there's only so many cards that we can look at depointing at a time, and Renin 6 is pretty far down that list, considering so many 1-point cards are seeing 0 play, so many other pointed cards are seeing 0 play.
I'm going to say no, Renin 6 is a 2-mana Phyrexian in Arena, which kills Birds of Paradise. It makes X1s very, very hard to play. It's good in Jund, it's good in lands, it's good in tons of decks. It is now a good, meaningful choice for decks which want to play that package, but it doesn't need to go to 1. It's probably, I'd say it's almost definitely too good at 1.
Yeah, I mean, like the odds that Renin 6 is healthy at 1 is quite unlikely. I think we
Yeah,
would
we
have
want
to.
Beseiju. Like recently, we got Beseiju, and yeah, it's a card which is getting better, not worse, as time goes on.
We can point Beseiju. I hate that card. That card is a design mistake. Okay, Dracos asks, any thoughts on Uro 1? Personally, no. If you think that Uro is a 1 point card, you have not played enough of that card. I actually have a whole video on my channel talking about Uro. I don't think any of us are willing to put Uro to 1 anytime soon because, yes, it's expensive at 2, but also when you actually pay the points for Uro and you see it, and it's in any of the 65% matchups where it's good, it'll single-handedly win the game. Like, every time you see an Uro, there's a chance it becomes an Uro game and your opponent doesn't get to play. That card is rancid, and I don't think we're ever going to put it at 1.
Yeah, I mean, look, personally, I've in the past propped Uro to 1. I've tried to play it in a bunch of decks, and every single time it sucked. But like, I think it's not because I don't think it's because it's like clearly a 1 point card or anything. It's just like one of those 1.5, 1.6 cards, which the thing about the thing to remember about Uro is that every single time we point like other threats, particularly the cheaper threats, Uro gets better. Because in any deck which grinds to the mid range, as Voltie just said, Uro single-handedly becomes the only thing which matters in the entire game. It draws you cards, it's the biggest thing. It gains you life, like it ramps you, leading to more and more other threats. Like particularly as well with surveil lands now, like putting a land into play, which then if it's a fetch land, creates another card in the graveyard, which gets a surveil land, which puts another card in the graveyard. Like Uro's gotten better at sustaining itself over time. When Uro is bad, that's usually because we haven't pointed enough of the other things which are speeding up the format beyond recognition. So I think the goal should be to make the format to a point where Uro feels good at 2, rather than put Uro to 1 and let it run away with too many games. That's the. But I for the people who are like Uro doesn't feel good to play at 2, like I hear where you're coming from. I've felt the same thing, but putting it to 1 is not the solution.
Yeah, hard agree. Ding asks, was Frog to 2 talked about? I may have missed it. No. I have it on my personal watch list. That video will come out tomorrow, but I think it's way early days to think about Frog to 2, especially as it's been cut by so many people since it went to 1. It feels like a 1 point card. I don't think many people disagree with that. It does have a lot of asterisks next to it, but cards are allowed to be good.
Winning Brixus list didn't even play it. Didn't even consider it. I think the thing about Frog, you're gonna remember, is it's a 2-color card. Like it does force you into a particularly narrow thing. There might be a world where it goes to 2 in the future, but for now it's not like super homogenizing. It's not like in tons and tons of decks. There are decks which play it, decks which don't. But yeah, look, maybe in the future it could go to 2, but for now, no.
Yeah, I think we would have to see Days 2.0 for Frog to be a 2-point card. Like, we'd have to see more free counter magic be printed to protect the Frog and win the game by itself. But again, if you keep losing a Frog, play more Terminates. I don't know. I'm really not about pointing every single threat into the moon. Some of them, yeah, absolutely. But a bunch of them, like... Swords to Plowshares was the 13th most played card that wasn't a land. Y'all are slacking. I don't know. How else to describe it. We have caught up on the questions at the moment, which is good.
Well, look, it's been a good stream. We've had a lot of good discussions, and I'm really happy to hear of the feedback from the community. Keep it coming. I know the public points discussion has been popping off with a lot of stuff, but I have been reading it, and hopefully what you guys can see is that some of the, not necessarily the specific ideas, but the vibes of like the general broader concerns of the community have been reflected in our discussions. And so we hope, we're always listening, so keep on talking to us, and we're always happy for it.
All right, upcoming events. Take us away, Mouse.
Great. So look, obviously, I'm sure locals and things like that might have other events which aren't listed here, but just a broad thing. If you've got an event which is coming up before a points announcement and you want it included, please talk to us. We love promoting the format. We want everyone to know where they can play more 7-point Highlander and where they can invite their friends and grow the community. So open invitation. If you've got events which you want promoted on the things, please let us know, particularly if they're well prized and well supported. In the next 3 we have coming up is the RC is running a side event on the 7th of March. That's a Friday, where the prize for first spin of beta balance. There are other second and third things, but you can investigate that yourself. So that should be a really fun and exciting event for those who either aren't interested in the RC or have already qualified. After that, we have the Mana Clash weekend, promising to be the next big 7-point extravaganza in terms of a 3-day multi-tournament, giant prize support hosted by Pat. And that's going to, and with support of, I think, MTG made plenty of games, but check their website. They've got a bunch of different supports. There's going to be a lot of cool things there. And with a first prize Time Walk and second prize Mox Pearl, and a Teams Trio event with 3 tropical islands. So that's a really exciting time to get together with your friends. Get a team together. It's not unified. You can all play the same deck. Maybe do the we're all playing mono white, like Omega Plains deck, or all playing, something. But come along to those as well. It should be a lot of fun. And then, Voltie, I'd feel bad introducing your own event for you, so I'll kick it over to you for the last one.
In case anyone doesn't know or has somehow missed it, I run moto events for Highlander. I know a lot of people in remote areas or with LGSs that don't support the format, they aren't able to play outside of, the 4 or 5 big events per year. If you want to play more Highlander, you can play every single Friday on Magic the Gathering Online. You can get a card rental subscription for like $10-15. You can play in these events, you can win some money, maybe even get to the Invitational. But I really wanted to highlight the second aspect, is that I'm going to be running more charity VFNs over the course of the year. The first one that we ran went really, really well, and I think it's something that people are interested in or excited to explore and have the option to play really terrible decks. I mean, we saw 13 Slimes Against Humanity yesterday. And additionally, stipulation events. So one of the ideas that's rattling around at the moment, and I want to get community feedback because it's very important, is if you have an idea that you believe the committee should be looking at, I can just make an event where that's the rule. So one of the stipulations that I'm thinking about coming up is Brainstorm is at 1 and Misstep is banned. What's going to happen? Is the format going to be better? Is it going to be terrible? I'm going to use the resources that I have, which is you players, to do some science. And keep an eye out for that. The event announcement channel on the Discord is where I put everything. So you can just join those events, play in them if you like. The charity events at the moment, I think it's going to be every 2 months. And that way, we can, as a community, get together and do something good.
Wait for the granularity stipulation event.
The 13.1.
This event special everyone must play in the Cattle and Curd Ape stipulation event. We'll have a lot of cool stipulation events.
Yeah, I mean, there's fetch lands are banned, companions are banned, custom points list of 200 cards, but you get 13 or 14 points to work with. That one's going to be the granularity special, and I think you'll all want to see and play that event. That's probably going to be a mess, if I'm honest. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in case people weren't aware. If you don't have the ability to play Highlander, I am attempting to make that more accessible to you. So come and jam, no supplementary product, 100% Raj. That is one of the first 3 that will run. No initiative, no monarchy. We're going to ban everything. It's going to be great. But yeah, I think we'll talk about the next points update.
Yeah, so the only thing we want to flag here, guys, is that we are moving it 1 week earlier than the traditional pointing timing. And the reason for that is the proximity to the Mana Clash event. If we haven't decided in advance what the points changes are going to be, but as we look at some of these, like events like RCs and get more reports from locals, which of course people have been generously posting inside the Discord, say we want to make some changes, we just want to give people an appropriate window to adjust, particularly because one of the events is like a Teams event. So you can expect a 3-week window between the next points announcement and the big Mana Clash event. And so, yep, if there are any big changes there will be time to brew and hopefully create an interesting meta for everyone to play in. So that's the reasoning for the moving this 1 week earlier.
Yeah, don't expect any massive changes. Like if you're going to wait until after the points update to do your prep for Mana Clash, you should probably start prepping a little bit before that, but at the same time, we didn't want to surprise anyone or jump anyone or, have a team of 3 source 3 workshops and suddenly be in the hole. So yeah,
don't rule anything out. Maybe the format completely generates over the next 3 months. We're like, okay, we're going to pull a handbrake, and anything could happen. Get hyped. This will be an exciting brewing period.
Yeah, the next points update will be anywhere from -10 to +30. So just keep an eye out on that.
That's the range.
That is it for the slide. So if anyone in chat has any questions that haven't been answered, I've been keeping an eye on it, and I'm pretty sure we've caught all of them. But if anyone has any further questions about today's presentation, now is the time to ask. Let's have a look.
I reckon we just pop it off at 3 questions and they've got them, and then wrap it up.
Well, let's see. But everyone gets any legendary creature as a companion with the old companion rule. Oh,
yeah, make 7-point EDH the event.
We already have Canlander, and we already know that format doesn't work. Much love to the Canadians, but they're cooking way too hard. I think people are just asking about my stipulation events. There's
VFN stipulation event brainstorming stream at another time.
Yeah, there is a whole Google Doc for them, but I do want to keep I read public points as all of us do, and I'm pretty sure most of you are wrong, but this would be a good way to show it. But maybe you're not, and we get to find something out. Maybe we find out that we really do have to point Lightning Bolt, which would be crazy, but these things are possible, I guess. Looks quiet. I'm happy to wrap it up here.
Well, thanks guys for joining us, and thanks Voltie for hosting this points update. We hope that you guys enjoy the format moving forward. Continue to bring all of the awesome decks and stuff we're seeing at KingCon to your locals and all of these other events. And if you see one of us in person, feel free to come up and just have a chat. We always like engaging with the community, and it's a pleasure to meet all of the other wonderful people who share our enjoyment of the format. So thanks very much, and that'll be me signing off.
Yeah, that's it from me as well. Bye everyone. We'll see you all very soon.
See ya.